they skew the statistics even further when a lot of this grains or corn are grown for ethanol, for biofuels, or to make beer or something, and we take the leftovers and give them to the cattle, but that's still counted. They just say, I just wanted to dispel the notion that all crops are just grown straight for animals.
Yeah. No. Well, that's not the case. I mean, as you were saying, there's a ton that's used for biofuels like ethanol and whatnot. But, when you get to the matter of the fact of it, 84% of animal feed is inedible. So, that's all food stuff. It's the husks and, it's the parts of the crop production that otherwise would go to waste. And so cows are essentially these upcyclers that are taking food waste and turning it into edible calories and nutrition and protein for us as humans and for other types of omnivores and carnivores that exist out in the ecosystem. So it's inaccurate to think that you could just eliminate cattle and use all of that food that is somehow going back to humans. That's definitely not the case.
Eat human.
Les humains à leur meilleur.
C'est tu apogeo.
Pique ninguém.
O melhor humano.
Picciutka nie wiód.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Peak Human. I'm Brian Sanders. I'm the creator of the Food Lies film, the owner of nosetotale.org, the host of this podcast, Peak Human, and on social media as Food Lies, where I try to put out good information daily on all kinds of topics, including health, food, nutrition, regenerative agriculture, and debunking anti-meat propaganda. Start back at episode 1. So many great episodes out there. I go for quality over quantity. I don't do that many podcasts per year. I pick the best guests, and I prepare for a great episode and have a great interview with them. So each one is valuable. Go back to episode 1, leave a review on iTunes or the podcast app, and share with a friend or family. So today I'm talking to Bobby Gill, who is the man. He spent some time with us on the regenerative farm tour we went on to film for Food Lies. He was one of the guys we interviewed. He's from the Savory organization. He's very knowledgeable on holistic management and all things regenerative. In this episode, we get into tons of topics, super useful stuff, good ammo when you talk to your vegan aunt who doesn't get it. You can use this information to debunk her. We talk about pretty much every myth out there to do with cows ruining the land, being bad for the planet, being bad for your health even. We get into some of that. Ruminants on land grazing are part of the solution. They are not the problem. Yes, people use them wrong. Use them as sort of a harsh term, but they are a tool. They're a tool that can be used for good, to regenerate soil, or they can be stuck in a feedlot. Although that's only for the last third of their life. All cows pretty much spend 2/3 of their life on pasture. So we'll get into all the details of this. A little bit more on Bobby first. Bobby leads development and communication for the Savory Institute, a global nonprofit facilitating the large-scale regeneration of the world's grasslands to address the root cause of food, water, and climate security. Since 2009, the Savory Institute has influenced management on over 39 million acres of desertifying grassland through its global network of 50 regional hubs that train and equip farmers, ranchers, and pastoralist communities to utilize the land regenerating potential of holistic management within their cultural and ecological context. Savory's new land-to-market program and ecological outcome verification protocol connect verified regenerative supply to philosophically aligned industries, bringing awareness and accessibility to products whose ecological footprint are a net positive for the planet. Watch Bobby's TEDx talk, It's Not the Cow, It's the How. Yes, please do watch that TEDx talk. We'll link to it in the show notes. We also talk about my new nose-to-tail operation. We started a whole new supply chain with a bunch of great ranchers. They're doing regenerative ag. They've been doing it for decades, actually. We bring it up in the show. My new beef people started doing this 40 years ago when the grandfather took the Allen Savory course. So that new meat is going to arrive October 1st. You can still order our other products now. You can still order the other meat now. It's great stuff. It's just going to get better soon. So a little more about Nose to Tail, how this podcast and everything I do is supported. It's something I believe in. I connected with great ranchers raising top quality meat, and I get it to you. It's like Butcher Box, but it's not from across the world. It's from Texas. We deliver boxes of chicken, pork, lamb, beef, bison straight to your door. Our number one product is the primal ground beef. It has the organs mixed in: kidney, heart, liver, and spleen. Check it out now at nosetotail.org. Also the biltong and the drovors. Drovors is a stick version, hugely popular. Best way to snack on meat on the go. Way better than jerky. No sugar, no funny stuff. Air dried slowly. Tender. Body care products made from beef tallow. We got the best body products in the game, made from beef tallow. No artificial chemicals, nothing weird, just essential oils to make them smell good. We even have some without the essential oils, just plain if you are the all natural type and you don't even need any scent. So we got them both. Check it out, nosetotail.org. Seasonings, of course, use them every day. And for everything else, go to sapien.org. You can link to the Food Lies film there. You can find out about Dr. Gary and Evolve Healthcare. Find out about our Sapien program, helping people lose weight, change their life. We got your back. We got a health coach. We got a 12-week course and the Sapien Tribe. Get all the extended show notes, private Zoom calls, great community we got. We got our own little website going where we can all interact. So that's about it. Thanks for listening, everyone. Thanks for sharing, and enjoy this one with Bobby Gill.
All right, Bobby Gill, how you doing today?
What's up, Brian? I'm doing well.
Oh, we got a visitor.
My dog is joining us for the podcast today, but hopefully he'll remain quiet.
I love it. Join the party. I love visiting ranches. There's always great ranch dogs, and Bobby visited the Rep Provisions / Eric Perner's ranch for an event with us, which was great.
Yeah, that was a ton of fun. I am not at a ranch right now. I live in Denver, so I'm more of an urban dweller most of the time.
Well, sometimes you got to do that. I know a lot of people who are looking to get ranches one day. It's kind of like this one day or a second home, maybe.
Yeah, and I know a lot of people who have. I mean, you look at the percentage of the population that used to work in agriculture. I think back in like the late 1800s, it was like 50% or more of the American population was in agriculture. And now it's less than 1%. So, there's been this mass exodus from farmlands, from rural areas, from, being intimately connected to where our food comes from and, understanding the ecosystem and its implications. And now we have seen the greater density into urban centers. We've seen the greater urban-rural divide and kind of how that has affected a lot of things, not just politics, but also, food and all sorts of things. But I think anyone who wants to get back to agriculture, whether it's hobby farming or, wants to make a career out of it, or is just interested in contributing in some way, we absolutely should. Myself, I was a biomedical engineer. I used to work for the FDA, regulating cardiovascular devices, and, designing clinical trials and, approving devices and all that sort of stuff. And, that was a fun deal to do, did it for 8 years or so, but it didn't really light a fire in me. I knew that there was more in the world that I could contribute to. And, I eventually found Regenerative Ag and the Savory Institute and made a career change. And it's, there's no looking back from here.
Yeah, well, I love that. And I know you're super passionate, super knowledgeable about it. At the event, you actually came to talk about, what you do. You're at the Savory Institute, and you touched on something I love too. Is I call it make ranching cool again. I'm like, hey, like guys, like we used to do this. This used to be a fulfilling life where we would produce food for people, and then it became this old antiquated type of thing. It's like, oh yeah, those dumb farmers and that type of thing, which is terrible. And now I think we're going to come back around to it because people are talking about autonomous vehicles taking jobs and all this type of stuff. It's like, what are people going to do? I'm saying, hey, let's make ranching cool again. Yeah. Let's get into regenerative ag. We can have a bunch of ranchers, farmers doing great work, fulfilling work, producing food, and we're going to need people to do it, and we're going to need jobs maybe in the future.
Yeah. And, I think the crux of that is, we are used to the shiny thing and going towards that. Like I can speak to my own experience. I used to live in DC, and I moved out to Denver, Colorado, probably like 7 years ago or something. And I came out to Colorado because the mountains are out here. The mountains are just off to the west. And so there's skiing and hiking and ice climbing and backpacking and, all this stuff. And I'm like, yeah, this is awesome. I'm going to have so much fun. But what I came to realize working for Savory, because we have a bison ranch that is just 45 minutes east of Denver. So, if I'm looking west at the mountains, that's where all the excitement is. That's where everyone wants to go. But if I turn 180 degrees and look out on the plains, all that shortgrass prairie, it may not be the sexiest thing when you first think about it, just big open land, it's grass. But if you slow down and spend time in grasslands, out on the range, in a meadow, in a pasture, like there is something deep inside of you that resonates, like you just like, oh man, this is beautiful and fulfilling. And it's not necessarily the exciting, sexy thing to be out on rangeland and to enjoy, the sound of grasshoppers and see, all the different bugs and, animals out in the distance. But there's a lot of value in it. And I think intuitively we know that at our core, and that makes sense, I think, from an evolutionary perspective, because for humans, we've been around for 2 million years, or Homo sapiens 200,000 years. And we, in large part, subsisted off of rangelands. We subsisted off of being hunter-gatherers, hunting off of these large grazing herbivores that existed on our global grasslands. And so we have this intimate connection with our global grasslands, which has been broken in our, this era of modernity. So, I think if people give grasslands a chance, we can, like you were saying, make agriculture, make grasslands, all that, make it sexy
Make
again.
it cool again. Yeah, and we did get a chance to go visit the Tallgrass prairies up north of Tulsa. You had to bail out at the last second. But
my flight got changed, so I was like, "Hey guys, see ya."
Yeah, but no, it was really cool to be up there. Yeah, and just it is a totally different experience. And when you're out in the grasses are higher than I'm tall. It's crazy. This is what it used to be. This is when the bison would roam.
Yeah, when you talk to people about grass, they normally think like your lawn.
Yeah.
And they're thinking, grass that's like, a few inches tall, and if it's overgrown, it's like a couple more inches tall, and it's hard for the lawnmower to go over. Like that's most people's experience with grasses. And I think that's unfortunate because like you were saying, the tallgrass prairie, oh my God, like that was the piece that when the settlers came over to the United States, they came out and they saw the wheat belt and the tallgrass prairie, and they were just amazed at the potential for it and the fertility and the number of animals that were out there, and what that meant in terms of that abundance of food, and the lives that they could create for themselves, which really was the lives that the Native Americans had been living all this time, by kind of managing these species actively. But yeah, there are large herds of bison roaming across North America. Like 60 to 75 million, I think, are the estimates. But that's just in North America. And in Africa, you had the large herds of the great wildebeest migration that still happens to this day. And there used to be so many more megafauna across all the different continents that have, through the course of human existence, started to become extinct. I don't know the exact numbers, but I know that there are significant numbers of large megafauna that, used to engage with the ecosystem, megafauna and, like cattle, bison, reindeer, sheep, goats, all these grazing ungulates are essentially ecosystem engineers. When they move across the land, they are influencing how that land enacts and what that ends up looking like. And when you remove those grazing herbivores from that ecosystem, it kind of turns things into a downward spiral of breaking the various ecosystem processes that you need. But yeah, going back to that tallgrass prairie piece, when you are able to go out and see the potential for what grassland can look like, and that's not to say that all grasslands can be tall grass. I mean, there are certain, there's different ecoregions that exist. Here where I am in Colorado, we're in the shortgrass prairie. So, not nearly as tall of grasses as you were seeing out there in Oklahoma. But out here, the shortgrass prairie is still just as beautiful, still just as important.
Yeah. And those grasses, they're not grasses like normal people think. You kind of covered that, but there's so many different species of them, and they're like grasses it's a broader term than we think. Yeah. And they not only were they taller than us, but they went down in the soil taller than us. And that's part of why they're so good is the root systems. So
and that's perennials. So there's annuals and perennials. Annuals have much shorter root systems. Annuals are the ones that go to seed every year, and they have to regrow with new plants, versus perennials, they establish once and then they're going to exist in perpetuity, so long as they are given the proper conditions to do so. But those perennials, they're generally much taller. But the really important thing is they have much deeper roots going down below. You can see some photos that people have of perennial roots versus annual roots, and it's just amazing how deep they go. 1 meter, 2 meters, 10 meters, and not only is that great that they've got longer roots and that there's more biomass, but those roots now have the ability essentially to dig further down into the soil and get access to different nutrients and minerals that they need for the plants to be healthier. Same thing, they can go deeper down to find other things like water, and not just find those things for the health of the plant and those that are going to eat the plants, like the cow, but those root systems are essentially a highway of exchange. So plants, through photosynthesis, are taking CO2 and H2O out of the air, and they're turning that into carbohydrates that they're then pushing out into the soil to feed that soil food web. So the deeper that those roots go, by having perennial grasses and perennial plants, you can exchange and push nutrients and feed the soil food web much deeper down into the ground.
It's super important. And to go back to what you're talking about, modernization and us moving to cities, it's all the people that don't understand any of this that are causing all the uproar, against animals, ag, and all this stuff. And they just don't know any of this. They're not connected with nature. I always make the joke about it's like the vegan sipping the soy latte in Santa Monica, and they're telling you about agriculture and how the world works. And, I know you've not been to a farm, because if you've been to a ranch or farm and you understood how this stuff works, you would not be telling me these things that are just wrong. So
yeah, absolutely. Well, and that speaks to that disconnect, that urban rural disconnect that many people have. And I think what that's led to is, we are the most ecologically illiterate society that's ever existed on this planet. And there are repercussions to that. And so, when you have that, soy milk latte sipping vegan who is complaining about cattle and other livestock and their implication on the planet, but totally ignoring, the implications of what it takes to grow soy and where all, the ecological footprint of all of that, of course there is hypocrisy there, but, personally, I try to understand where people are coming from to get a sense for, okay, what has informed your opinion, where you come from in life. Like I, grew up in the Washington, D.C. area. Like I said, I was an engineer. I didn't get into agriculture until like 6 years ago. But my life has changed entirely, and I've learned so much. And, I didn't know different types of grasses or the difference between annuals and perennials really, at the end of the day, or what the ecosystem processes are, or how to read a piece of land and understand like, oh, this soil is capped and this one's disturbed. Like all that sort of stuff should be second nature to us, because we should be living in strong relationship with the natural world, but we've been so removed from it. So when someone says, oh, cows are bad, like, yeah, I disagree with them, but I try not to place the blame on the individual and rather place it on the system that has allowed that injustice of ecological illiteracy to come about in the first place. The system that has disconnected us from food production and from understanding how the natural living, breathing world works. I find often, and I know I'm probably a rarity in this space, that I can have a really good conversation with a vegetarian or a vegan. But the way to do that is to acknowledge that when you peel away the layers of the onion, okay, I may say cows are good and it's how you manage them. They say cows are bad and you got to get rid of them. I think this, they think that. When you peel away all that stuff and get down to the core of who we all are, we want a safe world for us to live in. We want abundance. We want health. We want to leave a better world for future generations. And if you get down to that common theme, I think you can relate to someone. And so when I have conversations with vegans, for example, I generally start the conversation saying, I don't care what you eat. I respect your decision. That is all for you to do. However, if we're going to look at life on this planet and our continued existence on this planet, we need to talk about what grasslands and rangelands need to maintain health. Because whether you eat cows or participate in animal agriculture in any way, shape, or form, grazing herbivores are absolutely necessary for the continued health of grasslands. And we've got 5 billion hectares or 12.5 billion acres of grasslands across the globe. And so whether you participate in animal agriculture or not, you need to acknowledge that grazing herbivores are absolutely critical for the health of those grasslands. And those grasslands are providing critical ecosystem services back to us as humans in terms of carbon drawdown, in terms of water and recharging aquifers, in terms of wildlife habitat, in terms of so many things. So whether you eat animals or not is irrelevant to the conversation. If you care about your and my and future generations' continued existence on this planet, you need to care that our grasslands are taken care of, and that requires grazing. Now, it doesn't require you to eat the animal or to participate in that, but you need to respect the fact that grasslands must be grazed for the health of this planet.
I love that. And then you could turn it back on them. If they were educated enough on all these processes, then they can make a decision later whether they want to eat meat or not. And then if you debunk the health aspect, which I like to do, then maybe they will be like, oh, well, I guess there is really no reason why I can't eat an animal. And then I say the final stage is when if it's completely just your personal choice, you're just saying, hey, I just don't like it. Like cosmically, I don't like eating an animal. And if you admit that it's good for the grasslands, it's good for your health, and you still choose that, then that's fine with me. So I do have some productive conversations with vegans sometimes as well. But I want to go back to what you said, that the key is ruminants, the grazing herbivores on land. And vegans like to throw out statistics about how much land is used for animals. They're like, oh, so much land is used for animals. I'm saying, hey, we need more. Let's put more animals on land. It helps.
Yeah, it absolutely does. And one of those pieces where I think it's unfortunate where people say, oh, well, raising cattle, for example, use cattle as the example, takes X number of acres. We could use that instead to plant crops. What they're missing out on is that, if you look at all the global agricultural land out there, only a third of it is arable. Only a third of global agricultural land is able to be farmed. The other 2/3 of it is too rocky. It's too hilly. The soil is too poor. There's not enough water. And so when you factor those things in, you're like, well, okay, so 2/3 of our global agricultural land can't be cropped. It can only be grazed. And livestock are the only option in terms of producing food off of that. So, that's kind of a part of the conversation that's not discussed. The other part of the discussion, which I think is interesting, is people are comparing the land footprint of vegetable production, let's say, to animal production, and comparing the two. Animals, when properly raised, when you properly graze livestock on land, they are creating wildlife habitat. They are creating pastures that are home to deer and antelope and rabbits and mice and snakes and voles and like all kinds of other animals that coexist with the livestock. So they aren't displacing land and habitat in any way, shape, or form. To the contrary, they're creating it and they're coexisting with those animals. Now, the same can't be said when you have croplands, because what you're doing is you're taking that beautiful biodiverse pasture of all these different species of grasses and animals and everyone just in all these beautiful symbiotic relationships, and you're plowing it all up and destroying it and getting rid of it and planting usually just a single crop, a single species. So you take this beautiful polyculture of life and you destroy it and sterilize it and turn it into this monoculture of a single species. And that is not what we need on this planet. We need biodiversity. We need complexity. Ecosystems are more resilient when they are more complex, because something could come in. There could be a drought that wipes out a certain species or a certain crop, or there could be a pathogen that comes through. And if you only have one species that exists on that land base, I mean, you're screwed. Everything gets wiped out. But if you have this diversity of life and all of this complexity, the system is far more resilient. So, the argument that livestock are somehow taking up too much land is, I think, the wrong framing of what is actually happening, because they're not taking up land. They are creating land and they are being stewards of it. I think earlier I referred to them as ecosystem engineers, and that's exactly what they are. They are creating habitat for all life. And so you can't just compare the footprint as if it's an apples to apples comparison. It absolutely is not. The other piece, I think, of that is when people are talking about the footprint of livestock production, they're including the amount of croplands that are being grown to create animal feed. And so they're assuming that animals must be fed grain that has been grown through these monocultures. And they're using that to extrapolate that to say this is the footprint and this is the water use, and this is all the different stats that go into animal production. It's like, well, you're talking feedlot, grain fed. That is one form of animal production. That doesn't have to be the form of animal production. In fact, and what Savory Institute advocates is we should get back to farming in nature's image. We should have grazing herbivores out on pasture, eating grass, managed properly, creating this beautiful habitat. You shouldn't have to have all those other inputs and all that land that's being, plowed up and turned to corn and soy and wheat and all this other monoculture that's being turned into animal feed. That's unnecessary.
Super important. There's a great phrase that a lot of people use. It's not the cow, it's the how. And it explains it exactly, that we can do it the wrong way. And we could maybe even dissect the wrong way even more, as I don't want to be supporting it at all, because I of course am all into regenerative ag. My company knows a tale. It's all about regenerative ag. Like everything's about regenerative ag and what you're talking about. But they skew the statistics even further when a lot of this grains or corn are grown for ethanol, for biofuels, or to go to make beer or something, and we take the leftovers and give them to the cattle, but that's still counted. They just say, I just wanted to dispel the notion that all crops are just grown straight for animals.
No. Well, that's not the case. I mean, as you were saying, there's a ton that's used for biofuels like ethanol and whatnot. But, when you get to the matter of the fact of it, 84% of animal feed is inedible. So, that's all food stuff. It's the husks and, it's the parts of the crop production that otherwise would go to waste. And so cows are essentially these upcyclers that are taking food waste and turning it into edible calories and nutrition and protein for us as humans and for other types of omnivores and carnivores that exist out in the ecosystem. So it's inaccurate to think that you could just eliminate cattle and use all of that food that is somehow going back to humans. That's definitely not the case.
Absolutely. And I wonder, there's probably ways to do both. So they do a great job of recycling. They're upcycling nutrition, and they're also kind of recycling or taking up waste that we couldn't do anything else with, or maybe it would even create more methane if we just let that waste rot and, in a landfill. And they're turning it into, with upcycling, to quality nutrition that humans can use. So I'm just wondering, if we can use, but the problem is in the feedlots, they're in, they're on mud, and they're like in like a sort of small area instead of out grazing and, moving them around and being part of holistic management practices. But could we also use holistic management practices and give them some leftover products? I've never thought about it.
There are people that practice holistic management that feed some grain. So holistic management, just to kind of provide a bit more background for folks, it's a decision-making framework for managing all the various complexities of land and livestock. There essentially is no one single way to manage animals. And, that is exemplified throughout Savory's global network. I mean, we work with the Maasai in Kenya, and we work with gauchos in Patagonia, and sheep herders in Norway, and cowboys in the American West. I mean, all very different ways of managing animals, but they have that common theme of these are grasslands being grazed by herbivores. And there are some basic principles that come along with that. So with holistic management, it allows someone to make decisions considering the whole that they are managing. So that is the ecosystem, that's the animals, that's the people, that's the finances, that's the local policies and markets, that's the local community, that's the wildlife. It's considering the whole when you make decisions, and not just making a decision in a reductionist manner that is saying, I'm trying to grow my animals as fast as possible so that I can make as much money possible. With that, there are then planning procedures of holistic management, the main one being holistic planned grazing, which is what most folks know us for. And so holistic planned grazing is essentially moving animals in a way that mimics the natural behaviors that used to exist, like when there were large herds of bison roaming across North America. Now, we've domesticated most of our grazers, and we have gotten rid of most of their natural predators. And the grazer and the predator, there's this predator-prey connection and this dynamic that would keep them tightly bunched and regularly moving, so that they would graze a piece of pasture, and their urine and dung would act as a natural fertilizer. And then they would move on to the next piece of land, and they wouldn't return until those grasses had fully regrown and their root structures had fully regrown as well. Well, in this modern context, we can't really just take a hands-off approach and let that happen, because, we have developed much of the land, we've put up roads and fences and all sorts of things, and the predators aren't there to keep that natural balance. So we as humans need to be proactive in reestablishing that same type of behavior with the animals. And we can do that with various forms of management, doing things like putting up portable electric fencing to keep your animals tightly bunched in an area, and then putting up a new fence that they go to the next day, or whatever your grazing plan calls for. You can also herd animals on horseback or by foot or with cattle dogs or on four-wheelers. I know some people that are herding with drone every now and then. They're starting to play with that, so we're not saying that this is some, that you need to be a Luddite and shun technology and, get back to being hunter-gatherer living in a cave or anything like that. But there are some basic principles that we can begin to replicate. And in doing so, what you are creating is a world where you are getting the animals to the right place at the right time with the right herding behavior, because that affects like their selectivity of the types of grasses they're going to eat. It affects their hoof action and how they break up capped soils, which then allows for better water infiltration, and doing all of this for the right reasons, doing so in a way that is best for your operation, it's best for your community, best for the wildlife, best for the long-term sustainability of everything that you're managing. So to that end, that was a basic synopsis of holistic management and holistic planned grazing. You were asking about, can people feed some of these inedible foodstuffs that are byproducts of cropland agriculture and still practice holistic management and holistic planned grazing and still feed some of these inedible foodstuffs to cattle so that they can upcycle them, whether it's crop residues or husks or soybean meal or whatever. And the answer is yes. There's actually a really great video. Peter Bick has a series of videos that he did, and one of the videos that he did was called 100,000 Beating Hearts, which is the story of Will Harris at White Oak Pastures. And if anyone hasn't seen 100,000 Beating Hearts, I would absolutely say go watch that. But the video I'm thinking of is a video that covers this couple. They are holistic management practitioners that live in Texas, but their context, their holistic context calls for them to feed some grain to their animals. Like, they have made the decision based on all the different circumstances that they find themselves in, that feeding grain makes the most sense for their operation and the types of operation that they want to run. So they manage their animals holistically. They, move them around. They're bunched up. They've got a grazing plan. They're factoring in the recovery rate. So they're getting the best possible ecological outcome on their land. And they just so happen, in the finishing phase of the animal, in those last few months of the animal's life, they bring in some supplemental grain to feed those animals. And that's the decision they make. Now, is there an ecological footprint for that grain that has been brought in? Yes. Does it outweigh the positive ecological footprint of what they are doing there on their land? I don't know. That would require someone to go in and study that. But I think those are good questions to ask. And I think their example shows that it's, that not everyone that is feeding grain is, just absolutely evil and bad. There are ways of doing this. There are spectrums between good and bad. There's a lot of gray area and a lot of factors to be considered that lead someone to say, well, for this ranch to be financially viable, we need to sell X. And to sell X, we're not going to get there unless we do Y and Z. And that situation is going to be different from the neighbor across the street. And that's going to be different from someone in another state. And so it's not so simple just to say, well, you must do this, and that's the only way to do it. The best you can hope for in agriculture, and not even hope for, but I think the best approach to take is to encourage people to own their situation, to understand all the various factors at play, to really take that holistic viewpoint of what is going on in the world that you are managing and make the best decisions possible. And it could be that, maybe for a period of time you make certain decisions, and maybe as the years go by, your land becomes more productive, that you can actually phase out some of that grain for the finishing phase, because now you've got a proper diversity of species and density of forage that allows you to more profitably finish your animals on grass. And so maybe you do the grain feeding for a certain number of years until you can get to grass finishing. There's all these different factors at play that I think, when you don't fully understand all the different nuances and complexities of how animal agriculture works or what grasslands need to survive, we kind of jump to these, easy sound bites of, agriculture must be X. And it's easy to say that, when you're sitting behind a computer. But when you're actually out there making those decisions yourself, it's a very different ballgame.
I love this nuance. See, no one wants to talk about this nuance that you just went into. And I guess it takes a special type of person to listen to an hour podcast, about this and learn about it. But this is so important because, I see a lot of stuff online because I'm doing all this social media every day, and that people just think it's black or white. It's like grain is bad. You can never have a cow eating grain. It's poison. It's going to turn your meat into poison. I'm like, no, it's not. We need to calm down. Like humans can eat grain.
Yeah, and like I feel like so much of what the world is saying right now is cows bad, plants good.
Yeah.
And because of that, we get plant-based everything. I mean, you're getting plant-based soap and like, ridiculous stuff. And you're like, what are you talking about? Like when did plants become the panacea of everything and animals are these just like absolute vile creatures? Like, how ridiculous is that? Like, these are all living beings that have been on this planet forever, and we have always coexisted with one another. Like, there are symbiotic relationships between plants and animals in the living world, and we need to respect those. And when we like break those relationships, we break the natural cycles of the world and send ourselves into a tailspin, which is what we find ourselves in right now. I mean, the state of the planet is not really looking too hot. Well, it's looking very hot right now, but it's not looking too good.
It's not looking good. I hate that it's synonymous. For some reason, even veganism is synonymous with good and health. And this is really annoying to me because I'm from Hawaii. Just saw an article my friend sent me. They're like, oh, this vegan girl, she's the healthiest person because she's vegan and she got COVID and was sick for 10 days and it wasn't great. But like, it's crazy because she's vegan and she's so healthy. I was like, when is vegan meaning, why does that mean healthy? It's like the opposite. To me, I'm like, oh yeah, I could see why she had a bad time with COVID because she's vegan. That's not a good diet.
Yeah. You are a much better expert on, the nutritional side of things than I am. So I'm not even going to pretend to go there in this conversation. But I think we all recognize that, animals provide critical nutrition for human health. They also provide critical ecosystem service for just our existence, as we've already talked about. And so you can't just get rid of animals and, say, ta-da, we've solved all of the world's problems. If you did, there would be tremendous nutritional issues. And, especially when you get into the conversation of what does nutrition look like for people in developing nations and other parts of the world that must rely on livestock. They have no other choice. It is the only form of portable wealth and nutrition and, sustenance. It is their livelihoods, when you're talking about like the Maasai in Kenya. So to say we should just get rid of, grazing animals like cows is just insane. When you take a global perspective, you realize the privilege that comes from to be able to take that position. But it also requires that component of ecological illiteracy, of not truly understanding how ecosystems work. Because if you're saying we need to get rid of all livestock, you're saying to hell with 1/3 of the Earth's surface, because 1/3 of the Earth's surface is grass. And if you get rid of all those livestock, those grasslands are going to die. They're already dying. I mean, estimates show anywhere, depending on which paper you go to, anywhere from 30 to 70% of global grasslands are degrading and dying off in a process known as desertification. So it's grass that's turning to desert. And, when you look at satellite imagery, you can see it. Look at all that portion of the globe that looks brown instead of green. I mean, that is desertification in action. And if we continue to repeat these tropes that we need to get rid of livestock, that meat is bad, that meat is murder, that animals are destroying the planet, all we're doing is feeding into that downward spiral, and we're going to accelerate land degradation and desertification and climate change, and it's not going to serve anyone.
I always call it like the upside down world sometimes, or like I wake up, it's like a bad dream. Like everything that it's not everything, but it seems like in the mainstream culture, everything that is being pushed is almost the opposite of what it should be. It's like these big messages, they're all just wrong. And I don't know. I won't try to explain it all.
Follow the money.
Follow the money.
Pretty much how that works, because what we're talking about is a back to nature approach of farming in nature's image. Yes, it is more profitable for the farmer. Yes, it is more profitable for the local community because, you're supporting that local economy and you're employing more people at the local level. And you are not relying on these big multinational corporations. But the problem with that is that that's not insanely profitable for the big multinational corporations and the people who have the deep pockets, who can lobby, their politicians and push through legislation that makes it easier for them to make more money. Or they can bring celebrities on board and pay influencers, to say X and really, alter the shape of, where our, society is focusing the conversation. And so you look at people like, I think pea protein and James Cameron is a perfect example. So James Cameron, the director of was it Titanic?
Titanic,
whatever.
Avatar,
all the big films.
Yeah.
He owns one of the largest pea protein companies in the world. I think it is. He has bought massive amounts of land.
140 million, something like that, and yeah.
So he essentially is bought into pea protein. So he has a vested interest in seeing that people buy more pea protein and more products come onto the shelf that have pea protein involved. And so what does that mean? It means that if you demonize the natural form of protein that we get from animals, well, you're going to have to replace it with something because we need protein to exist. I mean, that's a fact that we know in terms of recommended daily allowances and, probably even more beyond that. So if you demonize animals, well, you can sell more pea protein. And that's where we see things like Beyond Meat, which is I think that's made from pea protein. Impossible Burger is not. What is Impossible Burger made from? Soy, I believe.
I don't know the difference. I tried to not know the difference, but
yeah. Well, so there's Impossible Burger and Beyond Meat. Impossible Burger is the one that comes from GMO soy, and they manufactured a new chemical that is essentially supposed to mimic heme iron, and so it gives it that bloody feeling and taste. And they actually did some really shady maneuvers to push it through the FDA to be able to sell it. And that's like a whole different thing that people can go and look up. But if you look up Impossible Burger, soy heme FDA, you can probably learn more about that. So that's Impossible Burger. Beyond Meat is the other fake meat. Those are probably the two most popular. But Beyond Meat is organic pea protein. So, their marketing is that like, oh, it's the better alternative because it's organic and it's not, or maybe not organic, but non-GMO, I think is the thing that they tout. But it's still pea protein. And I think we're seeing with pea protein consumption, we're seeing cardiovascular images or cardiovascular events on the rise in people. But there's, I mean, just seeing the conflict of interest with James Cameron, who has this huge clout in terms of what he's able to do with messaging and celebrity influence. He was the main funder for the Game Changers film on Netflix, which was the one all about celebrities talking about how, you need to stop eating animals and you need to go vegan. And to see that he's got this incredible conflict of interest, it's kind of ridiculous because, Savory, we work with, Savory Institute is a nonprofit. Let's start there. We're a nonprofit, not for profit. We do not make money off of this. We are educating farmers and ranchers and pastoralists around the world. We're a team of 14. We're a nonprofit. We have a very small marketing budget. I am not going to be able to go toe to toe with James Cameron and the messaging and the celebrity influence that he's able to put out there. And so the best that we can hope for is that people see this firsthand and they see the effects. They look over a fence line and say, hey, what's different about this farm versus the other farm? That's kind of really how we go about things at Savory, because we can't compete at that level of the deep pockets. But, the conflict of interest is there. And it's really unfortunate that that's what's really informing, public discussion about all of this.
Yeah. Well, I made a film it's not a film, it's a YouTube video debunking the Game Changers, which is the same length as their film was. So I did an hour and a half debunking their film. That you can find that. It's Game Changers Debunked. I put that out with actually everyone's help. We did a crowdfunding and got it out in 3 weeks. But yeah, I just posted today, very, very relating to this topic, about hospital food, right? And it was terrible. There was no meat involved. So this guy sent it to me. His dad had a heart attack. He's type 2 diabetic, has problems, with sugar, basically. His meal was pasta, like a boxed pasta, French fries, canned green beans, and a huge dessert. And the dessert was the same size as the meal, the vegan non-meat meal. And it was like this chocolate cake with like custard. And I was like, why is this so bad? Like, it's almost alarming how bad the meal was. And everyone sends me these photos, it's like a common trope, how bad the hospital food is. And I'm like, why? And, people say they want repeat customers. They want repeat customers. And it sounds conspiratorial to say that. It's like, but it really isn't. I mean, at the highest level, it's a business. Hospitals are businesses, and there are CEOs that have to make money, and they do have a bottom line. And I was thinking more about it. It's like, why is this continued? Why is the processed food industry and all this stuff, why are these guidelines perpetuated? And it's because it's the money, it feeds itself. So now this hospital CEO can say, hey, I'm following the guidelines and I'm giving the cheapest possible meal. Like, what's the cheapest possible meal? Is don't have any animal protein. Animal protein is always the most expensive. And you can have the cheapest, worst processed food. And maybe, the conspiracy people will say, well, so they can get more customers later, keep them sick. But I won't even go there. I'm just saying it's about money. And, but he gets to say, or she, the CEO will say, hey, I'm doing the right thing. This is what the guidelines say. And then, like you said, it's perpetuated. So they have all the big budgets to do lobbying and they push it. So now the CEO can sleep at night because they're saying, hey, I'm giving the recommendations, let's eat less meat. Let's like French fries and seed oil, and like, ooh, seed oil is better for you than natural fat. I'm doing the right thing. And my meals cost 1/10 the price than if we got some good regenerative beef, So it's like, it's like kind of obvious why this stuff is perpetuated.
Yeah. And, the dietary guidelines aren't just influencing what's served at hospitals. It also influences what's served at prisons. It influences what is served to school children for school lunches. It's not just a recommendation. It's
military.
Exactly. It's not just a recommendation that, well, we're smart, we can make our own decisions. Yes, many of us can, but many people cannot. And also, many nations around the globe look to the USDA's dietary guidelines to inform their own dietary guidelines. So, there are a lot of downstream effects when you have poor recommendations being put out there. But so you were talking about, the hospital CEO and kind of the decisions they make. I think from their perspective, their hands are tied realistically. Legally they have to follow the dietary guidelines. And I've known people who have, been dietitians at hospitals, and they are just like, I am given the smallest budget in the world, and I am given these very rigid guidelines, which is absolutely insane. And not only do you have a small budget and very rigid guidelines in terms of the macronutrient profile that you're supposed to hit for each meal and the caloric requirements, but there's also the sourcing. You have to rely on, like the Cisco or, whoever it is for your food production. So it's not like you can call up the local farmer's market and say, hey, I want all of your leftover produce from this week, and, get me in touch with the best ranchers you have, and we'll take the cheapest cuts. That's not even feasible from their perspective. So even if they did have the budget, there would still be guidelines and restrictions on what they can and can't do. And, those types of impediments towards doing the right thing, exist all across the board. I mean, they exist for farmers and ranchers that want to, manage holistically. They want to raise grass-fed animals, but they then look at the economics of it and see all the hurdles that have been intentionally put in their way. I mean, processing is really one of the bottlenecks for many farmers and ranchers that make it economically unfeasible to do, to manage the way that they would like to. You look at the regulations that require you must have a USDA inspector on site 24/7, or as long as the plant is operating, you have to have that employee there. I mean, that is an astronomical cost when you're talking about like a small rancher who's got like a couple head of animal, or even like 50 to 100. The costs for that are exorbitant compared to the profit margin that they're going to make off of those animals, versus if you've got the efficiencies of scale and you own your own processing plant, you have multiple feedlots that are feeding into this, you've got vertical integration top to bottom. The cost of having an inspector on site is nothing, and so you're able to push through in this CAFO model, grain fed, in a way that a small producer that's trying to go grass fed is unable to. And those types of requirements have been pushed through substantial lobbying efforts by those who benefit from it. The big meat packers, they know what they're doing. They're not dumb. They've got deep pockets. Deep pockets affords lots of lobbyists, and lots of lobbyists allows you to change rules and regulations and laws in favor of the way that you want to do things, or at the very least to make, to put hurdles in place that will cause the little guy to drop out, and you can get over those hurdles no problem.
It's really sad. And I talked with Gabe Brown, who people will know in the regenerative space. He had to have multiple disasters and go bankrupt almost to start over. And he was talking about how many hurdles are in the way for new people getting started, like just to get financing or to get a loan to do it. It doesn't work because the system is set up with the subsidized crops and all that stuff. And if you don't grow the right crops, you can't get insurance.
Yeah, there's another example of how the system just doesn't make sense for those that are trying to do things the right way. So I had mentioned White Oak Pastures earlier. That's a savory hub down in Bluffton, Georgia. Will Harris, if anyone's familiar with him, absolute character, amazing dude, love him to death. They manage, I forget how many acres, but it's a multi-species operation. So they've got cattle and sheep and goats and chickens and turkeys and guineas and ducks and hogs, and they've got everything, 10 different species. They take a lot of old cropland, from peanuts and cotton and soy, and they turn that to grazing pasture. So they buy up old farmland and rehabilitate it and regenerate it with holistic management. Anyways, they found that when they started managing holistically and having all their animals on grass, they started seeing a tremendous uptick in the amount of bald eagles that existed in their area. This was a story that was covered on NPR's Planet Money many years back, probably in like 2014 or something. So there used to be no bald eagles in the area of Bluffton, Georgia. But then mainly because of their poultry operation, they had all these free range chickens just out running around in the pasture, thousands and thousands of them. Well, the bald eagles get word of this and they realize, oh man, there is a buffet of chickens out here. And so now at White Oak, they've got, 100+ bald eagles that live on the farm, that they are there year round because they know they are going to eat well and they're going to be taken care of. Well, for Will Harris, he was like, well, this is great that we are providing this, this habitat for bald eagles. If you're going to talk about making America great again, it sounds like he has done it successfully in terms of bringing back the bald eagle. But he tried to go to the USDA and say, okay, predation loss. I'm losing about $250,000 a year due to bald eagles eating up my poultry. And I can't get rid of them. I can't do anything about it because bald eagles are a protected species. The best he can do is shoot up a flare gun into the air, essentially, and try to scare them away. but they'll fly away and then come right back. So it really does nothing. And he's tried to put out scarecrows, and he's tried to turn it into a tourist thing of come see the eagles. But the USDA, their guidelines for payments that they make to farmers for predator loss only allowed him to recuperate something like $3 or $4,000, because from the USDA's perspective, that would be the maximum amount, based on the number of acres and the number of animals he had. In their mind, all of those animals are in a big giant chicken coop, and say they are, pasture raised chickens, which really means there's a door in that chicken coop, and the chicken has the opportunity to walk outside if they want to. Realistically, the breeds of chicken, the way that they have been bred, allows them to be, they are so breast heavy because everyone wants the chicken breast that the animal can barely stand at this point when you're talking about conventional chicken operations. So, those chickens aren't going outside anyway. So USDA says, okay, well, if you've got this many animals, the most you can get, the maximum allowance for predation loss is like a couple grand. And he's like, no, it's like 250 grand. We know our numbers, and all of our animals are outside all of the time. So, if you're going to pay for predator loss, then pay for predator loss. Anyways, he went through years and years of legal battles with the USDA, fighting over this, and they just would not budge. Eventually, he succeeded and was able to recoup those losses from the USDA. But I mean, it took him so much in terms of heartache and legal fees and years of time to get to that result. But I think it's a prime example that the system as currently set up is not a system that is one built for nature-based farming solutions in the ways that we would hope it would be.
Yeah, and most people would say that's great that he's providing a habitat for more bald eagles. He's doing a good thing.
Yeah, you would expect so, and you should incentivize people to do so. But the reality is that the incentives are for people to go the industrial route. The incentives exist in terms of commodity subsidies and crop safety nets and all these sort of things that encourage people to produce grain. There's a minimum amount you're going to be able to sell it for no matter what. So you're going to get paid even if you have a bad crop, even if there's overproduction, even if X, Y, and Z happen, you're still going to get paid. So there's that guaranteed safety. But it doesn't allow folks to really choose an alternative. When you disregard all of those incentives that are provided in the industrial model and you go a different way, there aren't incentives to do things ecologically. There aren't incentives in place for carbon sequestration or for restoring wildlife habitat or for recharging underground aquifers or any of this. Like, those incentives don't exist. So people essentially have to say, all right, I'm walking a tightrope now without a safety net, but I have faith that this is the right thing. And so, that's a really risky proposition for someone to take on, especially when you're, a farmer who has land that you're managing and a family to feed and a community that depends on you, to basically get rid of the safety net and go a different way. That's really asking a lot from someone. And so what really needs to happen is we need to build incentives for producers so that it's safer for them to change practices. We need to create markets for them so that they know there is a place for a product where it is valued and they are going to get paid for it. That's something that Savory Institute we're doing through our land to market program. We're trying to create markets for regenerative products. And we do that not just on the food side, but also, fiber. We work with wool and leather and meat and dairy. And, there's a label that you can look for on products that says, ecological outcomes have been verified. It's part of our land to market program. So in doing so, you create pathways that make it safer for producers to change practices and evolve. Because I think when you talk to them, many farmers and ranchers, they absolutely want to do the right thing. And many of them are doing the right thing, at least to the best of their ability, given the situation that they find themselves in. But if we can create new pathways and create new safety nets and create new opportunities for them, I think we will see that ultimately they want to do that and they want to move in the right direction. It's just a matter of having all the pieces of the puzzle in place.
Yeah, and well, they need the support of the consumers. People always talk about voting with your wallet and all that stuff, and this is exactly what you're talking about here. And I love that Savory's doing that. So they're doing their part, or you guys are doing your part about. I love the verifications, and we were out there in the fields at Eric's ranch, and like you were showing us how they actually do those verified ecological outcomes. And you can look at the soil, and you do it over a year. You can talk about that for a second, but we need people to support this type of agriculture. And it's hard though. It's hard because I know it's super cheap to go to the grocery store and just buy whatever. And it is going to be a little bit more money to go to the farmer's market or, nose to tail. That's what I'm trying to do, is get more ranchers involved and get it to the people. And we're lucky to have this medium-sized processor where we can actually do it, where we have the money to actually pay the person to come out and do it, and we can but we're not like some giant feedlot. So we need people to support the right thing, and it is hard, but maybe you could tell us more about that actually verifying.
So Savory, we created a program. We've been around since 2009. Alan Savory has been teaching holistic management across the globe, really since the 60s when he developed it. But Savory Institute, the nonprofit, was founded in 2009. Since then, we've trained 14,000 plus people, influenced 39 million acres around the world. So there's this really incredible network of producers that are doing the right thing, that are raising animals in a way that is regenerating grassland health. And that's a beautiful thing. What we've started seeing over recent years is a lot of brands coming to the table saying, hey, I want to get into this regenerative ag thing, and I don't know how to do it. So you guys have the global network of farmers and ranchers that you've trained over the years. Can you help us get in touch with them so that we can buy from them? Because, we would love to get their beef or their milk or their wool or leather or whatever it may be. And so we're like, oh, okay. Yeah, that sounds like a reasonable proposition. But that kept happening. And we realized that there was an opportunity to not just be this matchmaker that connects people, but to really create a program that provides those incentives for the producer, like we were talking about, and does so in a way that maintains authenticity and integrity of the word regenerative, which, if you look back on labeling schemes, the labels that you find on your food, they often start out with the best of intentions, but then as the years goes by, they often lose their integrity. Big business finds a way to come in, find loopholes, and bastardize really the intentions that you started with. I mean, look at organic. Organic started as this like back to nature, thinking of this nice little polyculture of plants and animals all working together. And if you drive around Southern California, for example, which is where a lot of our organic produce comes from, it is large monocultures as far as the eye can see, hard-capped soils. It is industrial as industrial can be, yet it is still technically organic. And the industry has found a way to turn organic into industrial agriculture. And I think regenerative risks the same thing if we don't have some safeguards in place. There's a lot of people right now that are jumping on the bandwagon of regenerative and saying, well, I'm grass-fed, so I'm regenerative. It's like, well, grass-fed doesn't necessarily mean regenerative. You more likely are going to be, but like how you manage those animals matters. And so we can't just take someone's word for it, unfortunately. And you can't just say, as we've talked about, because there's no one-size-fits-all approach to how to do this, you can't just look at a checklist of practices of things that they can and can't do and say, well, if you do X, then you're going to be regenerative. Because it depends. It depends on the changing weather conditions. It depends on your soil type. It depends on a lot of different things. So you can't just have a checklist of things that you can and can't do, which is what most certifications are. And which is how people find loopholes, because they technically check the boxes, but then they find a way around it and they game that system. So instead of a checklist certification, Savory has opted to go a new route, which hasn't existed before, and we are looking at outcomes. So we have created an outcomes-based verification where instead of someone saying, hey, I'm doing holistic planned grazing, I'm doing agroforestry, I'm doing whatever, we don't care what you're doing. We just care what is the response of the land. Is the land getting better over time? Because if you think of the word regenerative, regenerative means you are creating more life that didn't exist there before. The land is getting better over time. So you should be able to measure that pretty simply. And so that's what we've done is we've created a scientific protocol for measuring land health. It's called EOV, Ecological Outcome Verification. And you actually, I have a product here from Rep that you can see. There's a little EOV seal on it. This is the old logo. There's a new logo that's starting to show up on packages now. But what that logo means is we have measured the health of that land and we have trended it over time, and that land has gotten better. And we're not just looking at one indicator of ecosystem health. You know, a lot of people are really excited about carbon. Carbon. How much drawdown can you do? It's all about atmospheric CO2. Carbon is one of the pieces of puzzle, but it is not the end-all, be-all of ecosystem health. There's also water, there's nutrient cycling, there's the community dynamics, there's all these different pieces. So EOV factors in the above ground indicators of ecosystem health and also factors in the below ground indicators, the soil health component. So it's looking at things like plant species diversity. It's looking at what is the quality of the soil, what is the soil health, what is the water infiltration rate, what's the, is the soil capped, what is the canopy cover, there's all these different indicators that we're looking at, some that turn over quickly, some that turn over in a longer period of time, those leading and lagging indicators. So we take all of those different indicators, we create a composite of that, and we trend it over time. And if that trend's positive, the product can be labeled with EOV. The ecological outcomes have been verified. And when that happens, we then play matchmaker with brands and allow them to tap into the supply, because the brands are very interested in doing this and bringing regenerative products into the marketplace, but they often don't know how to. And we don't want to just connect people to each other and saying, well, we hope they're regenerative. We want there to be, scientifically robust data that, absolutely confirms and substantiates any regenerative claims. And that's what our EOV protocol does. And the matchmaking with brands, that's the land to market program. So, we got a lot of brands in, whether they're big multinational food brands or, big outdoor companies or high fashion. We've got, a partnership. Timberland Boots, for example, is one of our partners. So you can buy regenerative leather or leather that comes from regenerating land. Timberland Boots, if you go to their website. Same thing with like women's fashion with wool. Same thing with like a bunch of small regional brands. It's all over the place. But it's really exciting to see all the different folks coming to the table, whether it's brands or processors or middlemen, everyone wanting to create these new supply chains and supply webs really that haven't existed before, so that we can create a market for regenerative agriculture.
I love that. And I didn't even know about it, actually. I don't know how I missed this, but until we came out to the farm or the ranch and Eric's ranch. And so I'm going to have to be a part of it, because my ranch at Nose to Tail, the people that I changed everything over. I haven't talked about this publicly yet, but I've completely overhauled my system, and I'm with a new group of people in West Texas, and they actually took Alan Savory's course 40 years ago.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Wow.
So his grandfather took the original course. I don't even know what it was called. It was
back in the day, it was called Holistic Resource Management. That was the initial name of it. And then it became Holistic Management and Holistic Planned Grazing. Anyways, there's been a lot of different names, but there have been people that have been doing this for decades now and have incredible results. And I'm sure that whoever you're sourcing from, I'm sure they are regenerative. And if we went out and, did EOV, set up the transects and collected that data, it would easily be regenerative and probably very impressively so.
Absolutely. Well, because the grandfather started 40 years ago. He was like the kook. Like everyone thought he was crazy. They still think that they're crazy out there because they're surrounded by just normal stuff. Everyone just wants to do the normal ag, and these guys are out there moving cattle every day. It was so cool. We filmed with them for the Food Lies film. We filmed with you for the Food Lies film. That's one reason we're with Eric, filmed with Eric. And so we're getting all this on film. But yeah, they're out there every morning. They got their horses together, and I went and I took my drone. Actually, I was trying to herd with my drone. I was trying to help them kind of like get them to move where they wanted to with the drone while I was filming them. But yeah, they're out there doing.
They leave the animal handling to the ranchers, because there's like you can very easily spook the animals and create stress, which affects the health of the animals and the quality of the meat and all that. So there's low stress animal handling, that people really specialize in, and it's something that so. For example, at Savory, we've got the bison ranch I mentioned that was donated to Savory Institute back in 2017. And, when we got there, the animals were doing all kinds of different stuff. Like they didn't respond the way that we wanted them to respond to certain things. And so we've been retraining this herd to respond to our presence and our actions in ways that keeps them as calm as possible, but allows for the most control to be able to get the outcomes we want on that land. But yeah, you can definitely spook some animals. If you fly a drone a little too closely, they can really take off. And if they're bison, they could really bust through some fences really quick. Yeah,
I've learned more about bison too. We visited our bison ranch, and they don't mess around. They're not as tame as cattle. But yeah, no, I wasn't getting too close. And actually, the cattle got kind of used to the drone, and they kind of ignored it, so it didn't really work. I wasn't of any help for sure. I let the pros do it. They got it handled. But yeah, speaking of the different ways to do holistic management, I mean, out in West Texas, it's very dry. And
absolutely,
I went to Joel Salatin's farm and some other ranch, and there's places on the East Coast that are very wet, and it's a whole different type of management. You're out in West Texas, you have to have more land to do it with. There's so much context to this. And so that's why I actually did interview Alan. You actually helped me get Alan Savory on the podcast last 2 years ago. And so people should go back and listen to that one. But he wasn't being specific. And I was wondering why, but and then I was like, okay, Bobby will be the specific one. He'll talk more.
I can. Yes. Alan likes to make people figure things out. He's been around for a while. He knows how to get people thinking and how to create those paradigm shifts in people. But, to the point you're talking about of the availability of moisture and what that does to a landscape and what that means for how you're going to manage that landscape. That's one of the 4 key insights that we teach in holistic management. We call that the brittleness scale, because if you take some, if you're in an area that has very seasonal rainfall or not very much rainfall, you're going to have a very distinct growing season where your grass is actively growing. And then you're going to have a very distinct non-growing season. And the way that you manage a growing and a non-growing season is very different, because in a non-growing season, that grass isn't regrowing after you graze it. So you have a set amount of forage to get you through X number of months or whatever it may be. Versus if you've got year-round precipitation, like you were saying on the East Coast, like at Joel Salatin's place, that's a very non-brittle environment. You can grab that grass and squish it in your hand and it's going to bounce back. If you grab some brittle grass and squish it in your hand, it's brittle. It's going to break apart. So that's why we call it the brittleness scale. The 2 extremes of that would be like true desert and like a tropical wetland or jungle or whatever. Those are like kind of the 2 extremes on the brittleness scale. But the importance of that is the availability of moisture, because that indicates how nutrients and vegetation cycles through the land. So say you're in a very brittle landscape, like actually our bison ranch out here, just east of Denver that's a brittle leaning landscape. If there were no ruminant animals out there whatsoever, when grass grows, if it wasn't grazed, it would just freestand. And when it's freestanding and not grazed, it eventually dies off. It turns brown in the non-growing season. If it doesn't get grazed ever, it eventually turns gray, black, etc. We've all seen that kind of like gray, died out grass. Those are nutrients that are now freestanding that have not been reincorporated into the soil. And they don't have the ability to do so because there's not enough moisture and enough microbial life to decompose those back into the soil and cycle those nutrients. So you need a source of moisture so that you can have sufficient microbial life to break down the cellulose and cycle those nutrients back into the soil. And the only way you can do that in a brittle landscape is through the rumen, which is that fourth stomach of a grazing herbivore, where they essentially they're like a mobile fermentation vat. And so they have all these microbes and bacteria that are living there in their rumen, that when they eat the grass then goes and it gets broken down in the rumen, comes out the other end as fertilizer onto the land, nice and moist, reincorporates back into the land. So you have to have a grazing herbivore with a rumen to cycle nutrients properly in a brittle landscape. And that's something that I think a lot of people don't realize, because when you're in a non-brittle landscape, when you have lots of precipitation, when you have lots of moisture throughout the year, it's very forgiving. The grasses are going to cycle back into the land and everything's going to be fine. And, if you make some mistakes in your management, whatever, maybe some brush starts to grow instead of grass, and that's not ideal, but you could bring some goats in, graze it. It's still photosynthesis happening. In a brittle environment, if you leave that freestanding biomass to just sit there and oxidize and die off, that is essentially going to never cycle those nutrients back into the land. It is going to block out sun from hitting new seedlings, so it's going to prevent new grasses from growing. And essentially what's going to happen is what used to be thriving grassland that was actively photosynthesizing. It was life happening in the cycle of life: birth, growth, death, decay, and then birth, growth, death, decay. Round and round it goes, year after year, season after season. You've broken that cycle. You no longer have the death and decay. And what happens is those plants eventually disappear and they die off because a lot of people in terms of grazing, they think of overgrazing. Oh, you overgrazed a plant and it died off. Well, the opposite is true. You can also undergraze a plant. If a plant does not get grazed, it's not going to reincorporate back into the soil. So you need the proper balance of grazing. You need the appropriate amount of animal impact to have proper ecosystem function. And that's especially critical in those brittle landscapes where there is seasonal and or low amounts of moisture.
That's such a good explanation. It's almost a sales pitch for people like, my guys at Nose to Tail and people doing it in where it's needed the most.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a very dry portion of the United States that is kind of in that more west of where I am in Austin. And
and there's tons of that around the globe. I mean, yes, there's the American West, there's the Sahel in Africa, there's like the Mongolian steppe. I mean, all of these very brittle areas, Australia is another prime example. These are very dry areas. And if you're able to bring animals onto that landscape, you're going to give that land a chance at surviving through really harsh conditions. Because not only are you giving it a chance to recycle those nutrients, that's the mineral cycle that we talk about at Savory. There's 4 different ecosystem processes that we teach people when they learn holistic management. Another one of them is energy flow. And so that is how much sunlight that is coming down, how much of that sunlight is being captured through green growing photosynthesizing plants. So if you can optimize your energy flow and ensure that as much photosynthesis is happening as possible, you've got as much energy cycling through the land, which that energy then gets turned into forage, which gets consumed by the livestock, which get consumed by us. That's that flow of energy starting at the sun and then moving through the different cascades of species. So you want to optimize your energy flow. You want to optimize your mineral cycling. You want to optimize your water cycle. So water, when it hits the ground, if you don't have good vegetation on the ground, chances are the soil has become nice and hard like a rock or concrete. And when that water hits the ground, it's going to hit it with a lot of force because there wasn't grass to stop it, on its way down. Yeah. So it's going to hit it at full velocity, which is going to peel off a little bit of that soil, take it away as erosion, and then it's going to run off because the ground's hard like concrete. And so you get all this erosion and runoff, which then creates flooding events and loss of soil. There's 75 billion tons of soil that are lost every year from agriculture. And, when you factor in that there's 7.5 billion people, that's 10 tons of soil that's lost every year because of how we manage our land. Now, if that land was covered in vegetation, that's going to slow the impact of the rain when it hits. It's also going to allow, if you have a healthier soil that has lots of microbial life because the nutrients have been cycling, well, that soil is going to be more porous and it's going to act like a sponge. And instead of that rain running off and creating flooding events, now it's going to soak up into that soil sponge. And now you've got moisture that's stored in a savings account for when you really need it. So if you hit drought, well, that's okay. You don't need to rely on what's actively falling from the sky. You can pull from what you've stored in your soil. So there's this aspect of resilience that exists from a time of, in terms of reducing the impacts of drought, reducing the impacts of massive rain events that cause flooding and erosion. And so that was mineral cycle, energy cycle, water cycle, is energy flow. And then the last ecosystem process that we teach is community dynamics. And so that's looking at what are all the living beings that exist on that landscape, and what ecosystem services do they provide? What is the relationship and symbiotic relationships between them? The relationships between grazers and grass, the relationships between fungi and plants, because you've got all that beautiful mycorrhizal fungi that's down in the soil, and they act as miners that are going and they are pulling minerals from rocks and bringing them up and exchanging them with the plants for carbohydrates. It's the bugs and the beetles and the pollinators. It's the other wildlife. So looking at those community dynamics and recognizing that the more diversity you have, the more ecological niches that are being filled, and the more complexity and resilience you provide to that landscape. And so those are the different ecosystem processes that we teach in holistic management. And when you understand them, at a deep level, you can see them when you're out there walking the land. You can look and you go, oh, I see those. There's some spacing between those plants. The plants aren't right up next to each other. There's some distance. So there's bare ground right there. That's a missed opportunity for energy flow. It's also probably going to mess up the water cycle. And those freestanding plants are blocking the sunlight so that new seedlings can't grow. That's some more energy flow that's being missed. And there's only one species of grass out here. We don't have all the different types of grasses that you would expect to see. So our community dynamics aren't really optimized. You start to see these things, once you've, been in the game for a while, and you start to train your eye on what you're looking for.
Well, you can even hear them too. You can go out in the field and you hear the life. And it was really cool learning from you and the other people. The Noble Research guys were there. So that's another great group that's doing this type of stuff.
Absolutely.
And they're actually been around for a long time. And we were talking to them about how they switched all their efforts 3 years ago. I think it's 2018, 2019, to regenerative. Before, they were doing their different way of doing things, or, they help crop growers and ranchers. I understand. And
Noble Research has been around for, I think, 70 some years, and they've been, fairly conventional in their ways. But over the years, and, I've seen the Noble guys at conferences and, sponsoring things and, kind of dipping their toes into regenerative ag and holistic management. And just recently they made a commitment that they are switching 100% to regenerative, and that's incredible. And I think that speaks to the momentum of, what is possible with regenerative grazing and regenerative agriculture, that when you create the right conditions for this and you show people what is possible, it's a no-brainer that you would support this, because this is what we need for the health of our ecosystems and health of our planet and the health of human beings. So it's great to see that Noble has, made a full-on commitment. We just, they made their commitment, and then they reached out to Savory, and we just trained all of their staff in holistic management. I think just a few weeks back, they all just went through ecological outcome verification training as well. So, they have been, deep drinking from the fire hose in this, but it's been incredible to see the commitment that they've made.
It's awesome. It's awesome. And we're getting down on time here. So if everyone doesn't know Alan Savory by now, you're making a mistake. You go back and watch his big famous TED Talk. You can watch your TEDx talk, which I just rewatched actually this morning to brush up on all this stuff. And I saw there's a little notification in the caption saying some of these claims have been challenged. So I always know, there's these groups, these anti-meat activists. I don't know what these people are all about. You just spent the last hour and a half kind of just showing all of the benefits of this. This is not like some dogmatic thing. We're just looking at the science of this. And it's very clear that we need grazing animals, no matter what way you look at it, evolutionarily speaking, scientifically, like it's insane. But I just want to know what challenges were made to your video.
So TED, and so for Alan's TED Talk and my TEDx talk, we both have the same warning on our video saying these claims have been challenged by experts in the field, something along those lines. And it's ridiculous. We've spent the last hour talking a lot about the concepts behind all of this, but the science absolutely supports this. Back in the day when Alan first got started with holistic management, there wasn't a lot of evidence because he was just getting started and people were just figuring it out. And so a lot of the talking points that people would use to refute him, because he was a challenge to the conventional paradigm, is they would say, well, there's not evidence. And at the time there wasn't. But if you look at, if you go to Savory Institute's website, we have a science library. We also have a resource library, which has like a bunch of synopses of things. But, our science library is full of peer-reviewed literature that shows all the different benefits that come from holistic planned grazing, whether it's carbon drawdown or improved vegetation or improved animal performance or improved economic outcomes for the farmer or the community, or improved wildlife habitat, or all these different things. They all exist in the literature. And so anyone who says the science doesn't support it has no idea what they're talking about. They're not looking in the right places. But if you go to Savory's website, all the peer-reviewed literature is there. You can find it. In fact, there's more that's not even there. I just found a new paper yesterday that is out of Argentina. It's out of the Corrientes region of Argentina. And it was studying producers that switched to holistic planned grazing in 2015. And they saw they doubled their forage production. The carbon drawdown was shown to be 2.1 tons of carbon per hectare per year. There was an added benefit that with holistic planned grazing, now they were able to phase out finally the controlled burning that they used to do. So they used to do prescribed burning because that's just what everyone does out there. But now they had enough forage that was growing on its own that they didn't need to burn to stimulate new forage to grow. And so that was great. So there's all these, great outcomes. And like, this is a new paper that, just came out of Argentina, and it's mostly in Spanish. So that's why I didn't find it right away. It came out in 2020, but someone sent it to me. But there's data from everywhere. I mean, we've got data from Zimbabwe and Kenya and Texas and Canada and Georgia and Mexico and Argentina and Australia. I mean, there's evidence from everywhere, and it's all peer reviewed and it's all out there. And it's hard to ignore. But despite that preponderance of evidence, people still go back to that talking point saying the science doesn't support it. And that's unfortunate because it is, but they're cherry picking their data.
it really annoys me. It's like kind of despicable in my eyes that these anti-meat activists are putting their dogmatic views that I think are harming the world. Like by active, like I see Earthling Ed or some of these famous vegan idiots, they're trying to debunk regenerative ag. I'm like, you could just do something else other than try to debunk regenerative ag. Like this is not helpful.
Well, they try. I mean, like years ago, it was funny. I think back in 2018 or 2019, I forget. But Impossible Burger came out trying to debunk regenerative ag and specifically called out Alan Savory in this like environmental report that they were putting out. And, you know, it was funny that they were trying to do that because, you know, I was given heads up of that was coming out the day before, you know, so a reporter reached out to me for comment, you know, from Savory. And I was like, oh God, what's coming out? And so I got a chance to look at what they were saying. And I saw what they were leaning on was this life cycle analysis that was done by this group called Quantis. And so it was this third party company that came in and looked at the environmental footprint of an Impossible Burger versus conventional beef. And, you know, conventional beef gave off, you know, 30, you know, I guess the footprint was a plus 33. And I forget what tons of CO2 per acre, you know, whatever it was. Conventional beef was a plus 33 and Impossible Burger was like a plus 3. And so they were like, look, we're 10 times better than conventional beef. Well, what Impossible Burger didn't realize at the time was that Quantis had also been hired by White Oak Pastures, who I talked about earlier, to do a life cycle analysis on their beef. And what they found, well, conventional was the plus 33, Impossible was a plus 3.5, I think it was. And White Oak's beef, because it's regenerative, was a negative 3.5. So for every pound of beef that they produced, they sequestered 3.5 pounds of CO2 out of the air. And so that was an apples to apples comparison because it was the very same firm that did this research. And I know people go and they're like, well, you know, White Oak, one of their purchasers is General Mills, and General Mills funded this study, and therefore there's a conflict of interest in the funding. And you're like, yeah, you can get into that and look at it. But it is the same firm that did the Impossible life cycle analysis. So if there was bias that existed that they were trying to make the brand look good, that same bias existed for both of those. So it was an apples to apples comparison. So anyways, I was given heads up that was coming out, and I wrote a long retort to Impossible Burger on Savory Institute's behalf that we published. And that quickly shut Impossible Burger up, and they haven't really come back or tried to touch us since then because I just pointed out the fallacy in the data and, you know, how ridiculous it was that they were trying to like debunk regenerative grazing and, you know, Alan Savory when the data was clearly in our favor from multiple angles. And I don't know if you post links in the show notes, but it's savory.global/impossible impact, impossible-impacts if you want to go and read that.
I'll add your TEDx talk, Alan's TED talk, anything that we brought up, I'll try to get in the show notes. And I just want to say to these vegan people, debunk CAFOs. That's fine. Yeah. Let's focus on the big chicken houses. And there's like 1 million of them in one room.
Yeah, let's look at the true culprit, which is the industrialization of agriculture. And the industrialization of agriculture exists both for animal agriculture and for plant agriculture. And we should be demonizing that across the board. I mean, yes, we are creating calories that are feeding a growing planet. How do we feed a growing planet is another issue in and of itself. But if we're going to look at who is truly the culprit with what is going on in terms of the health of our ecosystems, it's the industrialization of agriculture. And that's happening both on the plant and the animal side. It shouldn't be plant versus animal. It should be nature-based agriculture versus industrial agriculture. That's really what we should be focused on.
You just summed up this episode perfectly, and you summed up our film. Food Lies, that's like the ending of the film right there is awesome. It's not plant versus animal, it's industrial versus natural, nature-based things that have always been done. That's the solution. I love it. We're not going to wrap it up any better than that. Thanks so much. I love the work you're doing at Savory. We'll include all the links. Any other links or resources you want to shout out?
Just Savory.global, everything's on the website. Check out the science library. We're a nonprofit. So if you support what we do, you can become a member, give $5-10 a month, seems like a little bit, but it goes a long way for us. So, and vote with your dollar. You can look at, we have a regenerative buying guide on our website as well, where you can go and find all the different products that are land to market verified with EOV. Go check it out. Vote with your dollar, goes a long way.
I love it. Thanks so much, Bobby. Hopefully I'll see you again soon.
Yeah. Thanks, Brian. Appreciate it.
All right, everyone. That was a good one. Thanks for listening. Thanks for sharing with a friend. Thanks for reviewing it on iTunes or the podcast app. Go to nosetotail.org for all the great meat, biltong, body care, seasonings. Go to sapien.org for everything else. Join the tribe, support the show that way. Support yourself by enrolling in the Sapien program. Change your life in 12 weeks. That's at sapien.org. And we'll see you next week.